Hey studio class, welcome back to my studio. Hope everyone's staying in well, staying sane. Last week we covered canvas stretching, so I wanted to go over a few different types of canvas, or substrates, as I like to call them, because they're not always canvas. That's just one of the things we can use to paint on. I kind of want to cover the whole breadth of what you can paint on, just so you have a wider knowledge of it and more educated when it comes to choosing what you want to paint on. I tried to break it down into a few categories, but the different things kind of interweave, and it's hard to separate each thing but into its own little category. But it really comes down to personal choice, as always, and I think cost is one of the big ones. So let's get into it. Let's start kind of at the most cost-effective. You might recognize these from class. Paper. Now this is special painting paper. They have a few different brands that make this kind of stuff. Strathmore, Arches, oil paper. The important part to know, and I'm going to talk about this a few times, it's kind of the case with anything you paint on, is it needs to be sized. This is impregnated with a barrier that allows you to paint on it without the oil paint actually getting on the paper. So the problem there is oil paint is acidic, and it'll eat away at paper, it'll eat away at canvas, it'll eat away at wood, so you need to put down something that'll stop it, neutralize it from getting to the stuff, and in effect making it archival, which just means it's going to outlast you. So if you get famous one day and your work ends up in a museum, it'll last, okay? So we got to think long term here. This stuff, while it is sized, and it won't start to disintegrate immediately, it probably is not going to be the best for doing anything you're going to spend a good amount of time on. It might not be good for masterpieces. We use it in class for just studies, so it's no big deal. It's the most cost effective. It's what I love about it is that you can get it in big pads, and then you can cut it to whatever size you want. You don't have to take it to a table saw or re-stretch it or anything like that. It's just scissors and you're good to go. What I love also about it is it has a nice, it has a texture to it, almost like linen. I don't know if you can make it out because of the dark color of it, but it's got that nice texture, or a tooth to it. And that also comes into play when choosing your substrates. It's personal preference on what kind of tooth you like, if you want any at all. Some people like it completely ice rink smooth. Some people like a lot of texture. I'm kind of right in the middle. And then lastly, it is, the rigidity. So this is super thin, right? When we have to tape this onto a board in class, or when you're done with artwork on this, you would have to find a way to mount it, either in a picture frame behind glass, or somehow stick it on a board. So those are kind of the main things. So paper is kind of great for studies, great for mileage. Very similar to loose leaf canvas. Last week I was stretching with this loose leaf canvas, so it comes in rolls or it comes in these pads, pre-cut. I think this is 9x12. It kind of comes in your standard sizes, and these pads are great for long road trips or stuff. If you plan on doing a lot of painting and you don't want to carry all your stretched canvases with you, you can kind of tear one of these sheets out, just like a notebook, and tape it up onto a board, go to town, and then untape it, let it dry, and work on another one. So you just have a whole bunch of them with you, all pre-cut to good sizes. So this is probably the next step up in price wise, which you can do just getting this loose leaf canvas. You're not paying for the stretcher bars and everything. The problem here is that it's loose, right? So again, there's no rigidity. You have to tape it to a panel when painting. If you watched my plein air video, which I didn't explain, but plein air means in French, it just means open air. So it's just getting out of the studio, which I want to do again with you guys. I think it's really good for our mental health stability, right? So what we saw in there was this was taped to a panel. And I was using just this brown, and we'll get to that when we get into the stretch canvas, just why I like the brown. But it's kind of just taped to one of these panels. And so then that way I'm not painting and spending money on a panel each time. I'm just buying the cheap stuff, doing a bunch of studies. If it turns out good, just tape it on there. If it turns out well, rip this tape off. You have this beautiful border. And I try and figure it out. So this is a 11 by 14 panel. I just bought 1-inch tape, so that means when I tear all the tape off, it's going to give me a standard 9 by 12 size. So now I've got a nice 9 by 12 painting. I did 3 or 4 of them last week. Only a couple turned out, so that's great that I didn't waste 4 or 5 panels trying to get a good painting. But say, you know, I like this, is worthy enough to sell, then what do? I like to, I've found a few workarounds. We can take this and just sell it as is at a studio sale, cheap, but if we want to make it a little bit more professional, they have this stuff called Gator board, and it's a step above your like classroom presentation board. It's kind of got the same polyurethane, but it's rigid. It's a lot denser in there. And then it uses these wood laminates instead of like a foam. So there's actually, I guess, you know, the polyurethane is a foam, but this is a lot harder. It's for sign building. And so it's not going to warp. It's a little expensive, but, you know, it's going to, in the long run, it's cheaper than buying 5 panels and getting 1 good painting. I just take the 1 painting I like. I use some pH neutral adhesive. This is bookmakers, those who like make fine art books. I found that in that section. It's not the acidity. You don't want anything acidic on your wood laminate or on your unprimed canvas. And you just put that on there, and then you can stick this on. Of course, you'd want a bigger piece of wood, and then you go through and you cut out. And so then what you end up with is a nice painting on panel, and it's completely rigid. It's not going to poke through. You can either stick it in an open back frame. The other thing that I've been doing more recently, because a lot of these are just studies for bigger paintings I'm going to do on the same kind of material, so I think it's kind of fun to float frame them, kind of in something like this. So that way it's the same canvas, but to make it seem more substantial, I kind of put it in a really nice frame, but then you can still see the raw edges and stuff like that. And they're more study-based. They're not works of art, I guess, in themselves, or final products. So those are 2 ways I get past the loose leaf canvas. So I hold on to the kind of the good price of buying kind of the canvas paper, but I get that nice little more texture to it. And then the workaround is just you have to mount it afterwards or float frame it. But in the meantime, I usually just keep these kind of like these drawings taped up around the studio while they dry. So then next, so we've gone over paper and canvas. The next step up would be probably just the panels themselves. So what I would be painting on, like what I would have that taped to, would be a panel. And they can get pretty expensive too, because they have to be cut out of a nice quality wood. These are really nice because they're beveled, so it's got a nice beveled edge, and then they do like a 3-coat priming, and they sand in between, so you get this really smooth, beautiful texture. And again, that's a preference thing. Do you want something textured like canvas? Do you want something highly textured like, I don't know, like a cotton canvas, like a cotton landscape canvas? Or do you want nothing? So some people really prefer having nothing. I like a little bit of tooth. I'm right in the middle. I don't want, like this is nice for some things, but I like there to be something for my paint to grab onto as I apply it off the brush. Some people will say this is too slippery and it just slides all around and you can't get anything off the brush. Some people love it. A good workaround for these, what I did some of my first paintings are to go to the store and buy this masonite panels. You can buy it like in 4x8 sheets, and you can have them cut it there, or at least I get them so I can fit it in my car, have them cut it like twice, and then I come back and I'll cut it into smaller pieces, and then just to apply some gesso, and that's going to be the sizing kind of on it, because you don't want to paint, again, oil on direct wood because it's too acidic. So you want to put some sort of priming on there. And then in that same realm, this is actually one of my first paintings. It's just thicker, like literal plywood. And this comes to, which is good, it's rigid, it's not going to warp like the masonite might. The corners are going to be a lot stronger, it's not going to get dented or pulverized. Again, you can see I had to size. The size is actually, can you guys, yeah, there we go. That clear part, that's the sizing. And sizing can be a few different things. It can be, in the old days, it was rabbit skin glue, which they still sell, or they sell actual size, PVA sizing, that's what they call it, or kind of like an acrylic medium, or paint, like a gesso could seal it. So this was sized with, I think, rabbit skin glue, because that's one of my first ones, and then an oil-based primer. So you can kind of get 2-in-1 with an acrylic gesso. You get the sizing and you get the priming. So I had to size it, prime it, and then I started the painting on top of that. And so it's nice and rigid. It's very heavy. So that's the cons of working on something nice like this, is the cost probably is a little bit more expensive than a stretch canvas, and the weight. The beautiful thing about canvas, once we stretch it, is we can go big, and it's just so light that you can hang it off of one nail and you don't have to worry about it ripping it down. And that was one of the big pros and why we started painting on so much stretch canvas. Someone once told me we started painting on canvas when painting hit Venice, and they were starting to do big paintings, and they're like, well, what do we have a lot of, and what can we paint on? And it's it's the city on the water, so they just saw a ton of sailboats and a ton of sails. And so they stretched it, and they're like, well, this stuff is nice. It's quality enough that it's going to last. It's lightweight, and there's a plethora of it. So that's where we get this painting on canvas from. And I mean, it's a romantic idea, and I like painting on it. I like the texture of it. So that's kind of why I do it. There's definitely cheaper, I think, and more archival ways, because the danger of canvas is kind of, there's two things. One, it's puncturable, right? You can just stick, you can see them pushing, you can go right through it, so that's not good. And then the other thing is that, like we mentioned last time, if you don't have that cross support bar, and it's a big painting, this can start to bow, these can start to get loose, you can start to get some warping. There's this inherent flexibility to it, so if you're going to be painting thick, really thick, up off the canvas, once that starts to bend underneath, that paint layer's not supported very well, not like it would be on a panel. So it's going to crack. Because it's flexible. Paint is pretty flexible depending on the pigments you use. Some are a little bit more brittle, but it can require a little, it can handle a little bit of flex, but if it's too much, it's going to crack. So that's why people have turned to painting on panel. And then in more recent times, painting actually on the dye bond, like I mentioned. If this is sized properly, you can paint directly on there. But now the newest thing is aluminum or dye bond. It's just the same kind of thing. It's got like a plastic core and then 2 sheets of aluminum on each side. So you got the best of everything on there. You've got a nice rigid surface, can't puncture, it can't warp because it's not absorbing moisture like wood would. And the only thing is there's no texture, but you can get around that. Like this is, you can either mount canvas onto here directly with a nice neutral adhesive glue, or pH neutral glue, and then or you can apply your own kind of texture on top. So this, I've applied a clear gesso to it, so I can still get that nice shiny effect where I might not paint over it completely, but it has enough tooth to it. Okay, so we've covered paper, most economical, maybe not the most archival. We've got traditional canvas, loose leaf, but then you have to figure out how to frame it once you're done. Still economical, but kind of a pain. You can mount it on a panel, either through glue onto a panel, or you're probably very familiar with these kind of things. You see these a lot, like at Michael's or Hobby Lobby or Blick. And it's kind of just a piece of cardboard. So there's a certain flex in there, and it'll last you. It's like one step above paper and loose leaf. But again, probably not the most archival. You probably don't want to do any masterpieces. I use them a lot for studies, stuff like this. Or if I'm going to just do a quick painting. But anything I'm going to spend a lot longer time on, I'm going to either paint and put on something nice like aluminum or panel, or stretch it. Now, when we get to stretching, as we talked about last time, we've got the different widths, right? We've got kind of 3/4 inch, we've got 1.5 gallery inch depths. There's 2 different kinds of canvas, primarily. I mean, nowadays they've got plastic, like poly canvas and stuff like that, but traditionally and what you'll find in most stores is cotton canvas, this kind of lighter color, and then linen. Cotton is more common in the stores, like you'll find it like Michael's and Hobby Lobby and even Blick for the most part. But if you go online or in to a small degree at Hobby Lobby, I think I saw one section of linen, is this linen canvas. And linen actually comes from the flax plant, which we also get linseed from. So that's where the common oil in oil paint. And it's a longer fiber. You can see it's not as regular. So if I hold this close, it's kind of a grid uniform pattern, a dot, dot, dot. That's cotton. Very economical, very standard. You'll see this almost everywhere. More traditional is the linen, and it's a little bit longer fiber. It's also a more fine fiber, so it can get a tighter weave. You can see it a lot better in this. Again, they come in all different kinds of grades, so this is a nicer, finer linen. More suitable for like portrait work, where you might want to get like subtle transitions kind of in the face and stuff, where something like this thick, dotted, textured canvas would be better for landscape, where I'm not so concerned with the subtleties of the form and stuff. So smoothness of linen, and I do love that irregular kind of, it picks up and drops off, you get kind of long strands. I like that non-uniformity, I guess. And so that's the difference between the stretch canvases is cotton and linen. Both come in both depths. Both come kind of in a variety of toothinesses or textures, but in general, cotton's going to have more of a texture, and linen can be a lot finer. But you can get your really thick linens too. They're both going to last you about the same time. Probably the new poly canvas, which is made out of plastic fiber, is probably going to last you pretty long. The thing you have to worry about is the wood bowing and warping in here too. That becomes a problem. The other final one, aside from wood and aluminum panel, is that they kind of have an in-between where they take like the panel and I don't have one on hand, but they cradle it. So it'll just be a panel stapled or glued to a cradled thicker piece of wood, just so it has more depth and more rigidity to it. Because these can get, when they get very large, they can start to get warpable. And that kind of wraps up all the different things we can use to paint on, or the substrates. Working from cost is kind of the biggest choice when it comes down to it. If you're going to be painting a lot, cost plays a big factor. And then the tooth, or the texture of it. You can see like the paper has, and they make it to seem like canvas because people like that toothiness that actually, even though this is a fine linen, it has a little bit of tooth, so it grabs the paint off your paintbrush while you're painting. Versus something with no tooth, been gessoed and sanded down, so it's just slick. Some people like that, some people don't like to have any texture. Other people hate that it just doesn't grab the paint and you slide around on there. But with anything, you can paint on almost anything. I think I have a tree stump over there that I have some clear gesso on. The important thing is that it's rigid. It's not going to be too bendy and crack a thick layer of paint on it, so you want to make sure it's rigid. And then it's sealed with something like a sizing, either rabbit skin glue, PVA sizing, or an acrylic primer, just to protect whatever that thing is from the acidity of the paint. And then lastly, if you're going to mount it, if you've got something loose and you're going to mount it, make sure it's pH neutral. That way it does the same thing. It doesn't start to eat away. So I hope that was information. Now it's time to select something to put on our substrate. So we're going to cover either setting up a mirror next to your drawing space, or what goes into choosing a good photo reference to work from. So in addition to, or in place of, working from a photo reference, we can also set up a mirror next to your drawing space or painting space. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So I've got my easel straight in front of me. Just as in drawing class, we want to try and keep the picture plane perfectly perpendicular. So we want it straight up and down, not leaning back against the easel, not the left side further away or the right side further away from us, but as perfectly straight up and down as possible. That way we don't get any distortion from perspective as we're drawing. The same goes for your mirror. Okay, so, and I keep the mirror to my left because I paint with my right, so I don't want to be going across my body every time I have to look at the mirror. So I can keep my palette over here on the right, and I keep my easel in the center, and then the mirror to the left. And the mirror is angled just like the canvas is, very perpendicular to me. It is slightly tilted in a little bit, so that way when I turn, I'm looking straight at it. It's not on the same plane as my easel. You can see there's a little bit of tilt. That way, if I'm doing a self-portrait, I can be looking straight at my canvas, and I can line my back of my head up with that piece of tape and look straight at my canvas, and then all I have to do is I don't have to rotate anything. I can just turn my eyes, look at my reflection, and then look back. Now this image wasn't created that way. This was created from a photo. But if you're gonna do this, I would recommend doing a 3/4 portrait, because that way you can check your nose. See this little space right here, nose to the side of the cheek? We look for that, and we usually have someone in the portrait group we call the nose checker. So when the model sets back up, we check that distance. So if you line the back of your head up with a little piece of tape you keep on your mirror, and then you check that distance to make sure that's okay, and you should be good to go. Then all you have to do is flick your eyes over, take your measurement, take your information in, and then you just flick your eyes back, and you're good to go. You should be trying to remain as still as possible. Tape is going to be your friend here, both for marking like your head position here, marking if you're using a piece of, this is just a raw piece of mirror, so I have it taped off just so there's no sharp edges. And then if you're standing and painting, you also want to tape down maybe like a little X where you're going to place your foot, maybe both your feet, or a little line, so that way you can find your position again. It's all about trying to get back as quickly and as easily as possible, and then just be able to rotate your head a little bit. So I hope that helps as far as setting up a mirror to paint from. And now we'll go over choosing a good photo reference for a self-portrait, or any portrait for that matter. Let's look at what makes a good photo reference. There's a difference between a good photo and good photo reference for drawing and for painting. So I just went into my photo gallery or album and typed in or found me, and I pulled a few aside, and we can take a look at what might make a good photo reference for a self-portrait. So first of all, we want to look at the size of an image. So a lot of us might have like 4x6 photos lying around in family albums, but when you think about it, the amount of information we can pull from those are going to be very small and not enough detail to create a substantial drawing or painting. So first off, we want to make sure that there's enough information size-wise in the photos we're choosing. Next, now that we're using a lot of digital equipment to capture photos, phones and cameras, computers, we want to look at like motion blur and stuff like that. Again, this just all has to do with the quality of information you're getting from the image. So you want to make sure it's large enough and it's clear enough. This is a good example of one that's a little bit blurry. There's not really enough information in there. I like the design of it, but I wouldn't know where to put my sharp edges and soft edges and all the variation in between those, which is really crucial for that sense of depth. And then a little side tip, I threw this one in here just because, as in the same vein of having the right information, you need to know the problems you're going to come up against in choosing a certain photo reference. So a general rule of thumb is that when we approach teeth, they're going to be very hard to tackle believably. Not that they can't be done, it can definitely be done. It's just going to be a greater challenge because it's just such a subtle, we have a tendency to want to think linearly and outline all of this stuff, and that will destroy the realistic impression of them. So there's no problem with choosing a photo with teeth, it's just going to be a lot harder to capture. So you need to be aware of the challenges that each photo presents. So generally I don't tackle teeth unless it's very important for the concept of the painting or the kind of emotion I'm trying to get across. And then that reminds me of like family photos or professional photo shoots, where again, great photos, but not the best for painting from, because what they're looking for, a professional photographer usually, is to flatter the model or the family. And so they will use kind of flat lighting or front lighting and get rid of all hard shadows. And we use a lot of those shadow shapes to create depth and a sense of volume in our drawings and paintings. So we, as artists, are looking for something a little bit different. And that brings me to the quality of light. The quality of light, we run a feel across the form, across the big mass of the head, and the smaller masses of the eyes, nose, lips, ears, and stuff like that. So we need to think about the lighting of our images. The major big one is we want to think about the exposure. If we have an overexposed photo, then it blows out all of our deep darks and all of our core shadows and nice shadow shapes. If we have an underexposed, it does the opposite. We don't have any sense of light, highlight, halftone, and the such. And we want a nice balance of both. So an image like this would have a nice light and shadow. Things we want to avoid is multiple light sources, which confuses our light logic. So thinking about what this one might have, where we know the light is hitting here, so it's coming from above and spilling down the forms. We have a nice strong shadow shapes. In this one, it's a little bit more confusing. I love the design of this one. So this was set up for an abstract painting, so I love like the diagonal here against the circular forms here. All great stuff, but the light was not super logical. You can see there's a backlight here falling across the shoulder. There's a light coming in from the top left on the brim of the hat, and then one coming in from the right that's spilling down, kind of creating this highlight and then casting this shadow. So just way too many light sources to make, and it makes a complex light logic, which again isn't impossible to translate this into drawing or painting. It just makes the challenge a lot harder. So we want to stack the deck in our favor. So this one was actually taken for a self-portrait assignment. So that's why it had the single light source and it was a very clear light and shadow. And it was interesting. I liked the light, strong shadow under the brow, nose, features, and under the chin. I found it interesting. And that brings to the last point, which is you want the photo to be very interesting to you. So right now I'm working on a series of fig and leaf where the figure is immersed back in nature or in the leaf. So for my self-portrait, I went out and we took photos of me in nature with a flower crown. And so when I was setting this up, I was thinking about a few things. One, I wanted to correlate to what I've already painted. I wanted to kind of match this aesthetic. And I was taking this photo outdoor with the direct light source of the sun. And I wanted to, I put both of these in here because it's not going to be the final composition, or the final cropping, I should say, which is going to be a lot tighter, much like this one. But I did want to include as much of this background information as I can. So if you're on site taking photos, I like to keep my camera zoomed out, and so I can gather all this information, which maybe I might want to pick up some of the texture of the leaves here or the branches here and include them in a later part of the composition. So I think it's, if you're going to take a tight cropped photo, make sure to get more reference of the background that you can include later. What I was noticing was I liked the strong light source, but it was almost creating too much contrast. So it was creating these really harsh cast shadows from the leaves. And I did like this coloration of the glow, which I might try to find a way to incorporate that into the cast shadows. But it was, you can see it kind of cutting into my eye socket. Really nice for the delineation of this plane from the forehead into the eye socket, and then the same thing with the top and side, delineating it from the bottom of the nose. Nice cast shadow there, but overall this was kind of breaking up my face too dramatically. So then we walked back into the tree line here where there's a little bit more cover, and we got these subdued photos where the shadow shapes are a little bit softer. I'm still pretty strong here. So I'm looking at this and I know I like this a lot better. It's a lot softer, it's not going to be as intense, but I think I will have to push the contrast of the eye sockets, nose, lips, and chin shadow just to create the structure and depth in these features I want. So I'm trying to identify the problem I'm going to have, and then I'll address that in the painting. And compared to this one, I kept both of these because I'm feeling a little squinty here, and I think in the final painting I want to direct my eyes towards the viewer, kind of addressing the viewer, and so I felt like if I was squinting down this hard at the viewer, it might come across angry. So I think I'll take this kind of view and then just alter the pupils to face the viewer. And then I also didn't love this tangency. I know in the mirror setup we were talking about finding where your nose sits comparative to the edge of your cheek. And I liked this kind of little area right there, showing that clear division of depth where you have the nose clearly in front of the back cheek. This one, it gets a little confusing. So I think I'll probably keep both of these up next to my easel while drawing and painting, but overall I'll go with this general composition. And then finally, I like to do a little bit of digital mock-up, playing with kind of my color balance and adding some like digital texture of my gesso marks and canvas. And so ultimately it came out looking like this. So this will be kind of what I'm aiming for, knowing that it's not going to be this exact. I'll leave room for a lot of abstraction out here as I move out into the foliage and keep more of the highly rendered stuff in the portrait, but aiming for a result similar to kind of like this.